All right, welcome back. We are now live. Part of the joys of living in the time of COVID-19 is learning how to do. Welcome back. We are now live. Part of the learning how to do live events from your living room. And so we are figuring that out today, and hope that you'll bear with us. And for the rest of this series of events, we'll have a better handle on things. Ellie and I want to begin again with just a couple of quick remarks before we jump into what will be the bulk of today, which is the live panel.
So, hello and welcome to the first W12 online event. My name is Ellie Leaning and I'm the W12 project lead with the Institute for Ecological Civilization, or EcoCiv for short, a US-based nonprofit.
And my name is Jeremy Fackenthal. I'm the managing director for the Institute for Ecological Civilization.
Save Our Schools, or SOS for short, a Cape Town-based nonprofit, and EcoCiv are the two organizing partners behind W12, and we are pleased that you have joined us today. We have a great panel discussion lined up and are excited to hear from these global water experts.
We'll start with some just very quick updates, and then Philip Clayton, our president of the Institute for Ecological Civilization, will introduce our panelists. Before the panel begins, we want to share with you a preview and demonstration of a project at which we are hard at work, the W12 Protocol database. Finally, our panel of 7 global water experts moderated by Philip will comprise the bulk of today's event.
Unfortunately, we're not in sunny South Africa today, but we look forward to seeing you in person at the inaugural W12 Congress in Cape Town, tentatively scheduled for late February 2021. The confirmation of this date will depend on advice from the City of Cape Town, the South African government, and the World Health Organization. Follow us on social media and through our newsletters to keep up to date. In the meantime, we're thrilled to have you here and we look forward to future online events in this series.
Well, we're all at home on lockdown. The W12 partners are certainly keeping quite busy. EcoCiv is engaged in the development of the W12 Protocol, climate policy advising, and designing solutions for the well-being of people and the planet.
Our partners at SOS are continuing their direct action projects. They've recently moved available staff away from W12 to focus on installing hand washing and sanitation facilities in informal settlements around Cape Town to assist in fighting COVID-19. As the current crisis highlights the importance of water and hygiene, this work is even more vital, and SOS is now expanding into food parcel deliveries and face mask distributions as well. If you're interested in being involved with either of our organizations, please do be in touch. You'll see our contact information on the screen at the end of this video or in the description below.
And now Philip will introduce our panelists.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the W12 Conference on Urban Water Security and Uncertain Times. My name is Philip Clayton. I'm the president of the Institute for Ecological Civilization. We'd like to express our gratitude to the major funders of this event, Grundfos, for its generous support of W12 programs in general and of the Water Protocol research in particular, and likewise to the John Templeton Foundation for supporting the Cape Town Conference and the subsequent dissemination of the results. And now the 7 panelists. I welcome first Karin Krchnak, the program manager for the 2030 Water Resources Group hosted by the World Bank. Previously, Karin served as Senior Director for the U.S. Water Program of the World Wildlife Fund and in several director roles for the Great Rivers Partnership at the Nature Conservancy, as well as in governance roles at the Global Water Partnership, the Gender and Water Alliance, and the World Water Council. Welcome, Karin. I next introduce Rashad Shawa, Chairman of the Board of Directors of the International Water Bank. Rashad is also chairman of MAI Switzerland AG and a member of the World Water Council. Rashad is a former executive senior banker, executive advisor, and executive board member of Coutts & Company Bank AG, the United Bank of Kuwait PLC, Royal Trust Bank AG, Dresdner Bank AG, Banque Privée Edmond de Rothschild AG, and Warburg & Company AG. He's also a former member of the Global Advisory Board of Babson College in Wellesley, Massachusetts. Henk Ovink is Special Envoy for International Water Affairs, Kingdom of the Netherlands, and Sherpa to the UN World Bank High-Level Panel on Water. As a special envoy for the Dutch cabinet, Henk has played an influential role as ambassador for water in multiple countries around the world. Henk has also served as acting director general of spatial planning and water affairs for the Netherlands, and is a member of President Obama's Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force. The co-author of Too Big, Rebuild by Design, Henk teaches at Harvard Graduate School of Design, the London School of Economics, and the University of Groningen. Beth Chitekwe-Biti is acting director of Slum Dwellers International. Before moving to SDI, Beth was the founder and director of the Dialogue on Shelter, a Zimbabwean NGO that works in alliance with the Zimbabwe Homeless People's Federation. Beth holds a planning degree from the University of Zimbabwe, a postgraduate certificate in housing from the University College of London, and a PhD in development policy and management from the University of Manchester. Welcome, Beth. I next introduce Betsy Otto, Director of the Global Water Program of the World Resources Institute, where she has been leading the development of Aqueduct, a global water risk assessment and mapping tool. For more than 2 decades, Betsy has worked on water resource management, ecosystem protection, and urban water systems, including at American Rivers in Washington, D.C. Betsy holds a BA in economics, an MBA, and an MA in water resources management from the University of Wisconsin. She has been a Loeb Fellow at Harvard's Graduate School of Design. Next is Alexandros Makargakis, Acting Deputy Secretary of the Intergovernmental Hydrological Program of UNESCO, and also a program specialist for UNESCO's Water for Human Settlements program. Alexandros brings more than 2 decades of international experience working on natural resources management. In addition to his 16 years at UNESCO, he has 8 years of experience in the bioremediation of hazardous chemicals and 3 years in municipal water and wastewater purification. Among many posts, he has represented UNESCO at Windhoek and Addis Ababa. And finally, last but not least, Mr. Mads Nipper, the CEO of the global water technology company Grundfos. Before becoming the Grundfos CEO, Mads served on the management board of LEGO. Mads has become a major voice in the debate about climate change and how business can make a significant difference. Mads was recently named Denmark's #1 CEO superbrand on social responsibility. He is chairman of the Danish government's Climate Partnership for Production Companies, where he promotes visionary solutions to realize Denmark's ambiguous target of reducing CO2 emissions by 70% by 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to announce that the framework for the W12 Water Protocol has been released today. The document is available on the EcoCiv and the W12 websites, as you can see on your screen. This information will also appear in the comment section below this video. Again, thanks to the sponsorship of Grundfos, this document is now an extensive database allowing people to search for solutions and challenges across cities. UNESCO has endorsed the protocol platform, and they're partnering with us on the platform. We offer you now a short clip so that you get a sense of what the W12 Water Protocol can supply.
The W12 Protocol is an electronic resource that presents solutions cities have found and facilitates peer-to-peer communication between city water managers around the world. The core of the resource is a growing set of city-specific case studies with tools to guide users to solutions of particular interest. Upon opening the application, a user will see a list of case studies and links to core issues and solutions. Selecting a case study will bring up a description of the city's water situation and an analysis of solutions implemented there. Take Amman, which successfully supplies water to nearly all its inhabitants in spite of being the capital of one of the most arid countries in the world. The profile gives an overview of the issues driving water scarcity in Amman. case studies can also be reached from the map. Scrolling down, users will find a discussion of a specific initiative to move from intermittent to continuous water supply in one part of the city. This discussion includes additional resources and links. In the operational version of the application, it will also include individual contacts. Studies will be tagged with core issues and solutions, which will link them to other studies. Clicking on continuous supply in the Amman study, for example, takes us to a list of the case studies carrying that tag. These tags are not prescriptions, but rather a means of connecting users with a broad set of options based on concrete experience. Users can also browse the database by tag. A city manager interested in solutions for better data on water consumption could select the issue tag Insufficient Data under Water Use. The tag leads to a list of cities that have faced that challenge. Under Los Angeles, there is a case study on the work of researchers at UCLA who collected data from multiple sources in order to map the urban metabolism of the city. A user interested in innovative finance options might select the tag for Sustainable Cost Recovery. This leads to a study on a pipe renovation project in Vietnam that successfully reduced non-revenue water using a blended finance model. City leaders and utilities managers will be able to create profiles for their cities by adding tags of interest to them. Once the application is operational, we envision exciting communications campaigns, a webinar highlighting each case study, for example. As the database expands, users will be able to organize its contents to see familiar problems in new ways. This is above all an integrative approach, meant to highlight the specific features of each city's situation and to encourage integrated strategies for applying solutions in new contexts. How can something that worked in one place be adapted to work in another? The interactive database, backed by UNESCO, will be continually updated as new issues and new solutions are found. It will also seek new ways to facilitate peer-to-peer communication and help cities rethink how water relates to urban development and long-term human flourishing. If you are interested in partnering with us or learning more about the W12 Protocol, we encourage you to contact us. We are excited to collaborate on solutions to achieve water security for all.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you've just heard, we're privileged to have on this panel 7 of the world's top water experts. Let's jump immediately into the discussion. Let me open with a general question to anyone who wishes to begin. How can we balance long-term goals for sustainable water access with the immediate needs for improving access and delivery, especially in this time of global crisis? What would be the framework that you would suggest to us as water managers, city governments, businesses, and nonprofits attempt to deal with this situation? Please feel free to unmute yourself and to begin.
Thank you. From the perspective of the communities that we work with, who likely are slum dwellers in cities in the global south, the reality is they are the least consumers of water, and parity around provision actually will make cities work better. So we have found that in surveys, for instance, that we have carried out as Slum Dwellers International in some cities like Nairobi, that there is a definite poverty penalty around water consumption and resourcing of slum dwellers, where people in slums will pay 172% more than the average household for water. So I believe that cities have to find a minimum provision that is available for every citizen in their cities, because this is absolutely critical in our current situation with COVID-19. It's absolutely imperative that cities begin to look at water supply not as a private commodity, but a public good that is necessary for every citizen in every city. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Others, how would you frame this tension between the long-term goals and the immediate needs as you see them? Betsy, and then Karin.
Yeah, I really agree with what Beth has said. I think we really need to see improving access and delivery and long-term goals for sustainable access as dual sides of the same coin. First, we need to deal with the 40% of the world's population that does not have adequate access to hand washing. And it is particularly bad, as Beth has said, of course, in informal settlements. WRI did a report, Undrinkable and Unaffordable, that looked at 15 cities in a deep dive way and saw that they're paying 52 times more if they're not connected to the pipe water system. And of course, informal settlement households are paying even more than the recommended 3 to 5% of household income. So that is absolutely true. We also need to look, though, at how we manage the foundations of clean water access. And this is an area that WRI spends a lot of time thinking about. And that is, what are the water resource management efforts that we need to undertake? How do we look beyond just the city boundaries to where the water is coming from, the city sources? 2 years ago in Cape Town would be a good example of that, where certainly there was a very bad drought. There were a lack of access to water issues, but there was also how water was allocated to agriculture, for example, in the outer regions. We need also to protect water sources and invest in the green infrastructure that is the wellspring of ample clean water. And then we need better water systems operations too. So we really need to be thinking about both sides of that coin.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Betsy. Karin.
Yes, yeah, I mean, I completely agree. To not see them as separate issues, I mean, they're interlinked. Partly, I think part of this is looking at more decentralized solutions that become part of the longer supply service delivery options. The World Bank did a study last year on citywide inclusive water supply, refocusing on off-grid solutions with the idea is how to achieve SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 6.1. And the number of urban populations relying on off-grid solutions is about to increase to about 1 billion by 2030, with water that doesn't meet the Joint Monitoring Program definition of safely managed water. So, and these are the more poor segments of society. So utilities we're seeing in rapidly urbanizing developing countries just can't keep pace. Pipe service delivery will continue to fall behind as urban growth faces challenges around governance, efficiency, and financing. So I think we need to reimagine these solutions, including off-grid solution, in a way that helps achieve SDGs and tackles the key issues, including kind of drive innovative financial approaches, new policy models and policy changes that can support these types of different solutions, disruptive technologies, and also potentially market platforms that can support these types of different solutions. So I just urge, we don't look at these two separate disconnected areas, but really need to be part of kind of, as we look at these solutions, how they can be interconnected to provide for poor segments of society and long-term sustainable supplies overall.
Thank you, Karin. Henk has unmuted.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with all three of you, Karin, Beth, and Betsy. But there's also a side that every dollar spent in water is a good dollar because it leverages other investments. It adds values across the SDGs. So it's not an opposite short-term versus long-term. It's actually a short-term investment that builds up to the long-term sustainable development goals. So if you pose it as an opposite, that's already thinking that there is a difference. It's not. Second, the numbers are terrible. Over a billion, 40% of the world's population, no access to hand washing facilities. If you take sanitation, and if you look at the death because of health issues, every dollar spent in water reduces risks on health, increases opportunity for women and kids, and so forth. So investing in water adds values across the SDG. So that means that with the current COVID recovery, and not a response, but the next step to recovery, there is a challenge because that recovery will be focused on jobs, jobs, jobs. And then we're thinking about trillions, trillions, and trillions. And the water sector is not about trillions. These investments in water infrastructure on the small and low scale in the communities are not so much about the billions, but often about the millions. But they create jobs, they create opportunities, they create equality, they create access, they create better health, a better environment. So it's investing in these far more intelligent business cases that will leverage bigger investment opportunities. So water really is an enabler. a leverage for sustainable development. So tackling the fragmentation and the small scale makes it possible to achieve the sustainable development goals on the long term by investing in water and sanitation and hygiene now, including the broadening of the scope into integrated water resource management. But the speed might drive stupid infrastructure, but thinking is not slow, thinking is smart. We have to incorporate these SDGs in every dollar we spend now in these communities.
Thank you, Henk. That's a great transition to Matt Snipper.
Yes, it is indeed. And I fully agree with my fellow panelists and especially what Henk said, because we need to face the realities that in many cases, societies and cities and mayors and lawmakers will be very focused on creating jobs. I think the best service we can do ourselves is to actually make not a very thorough, because that'll take too long, but to map what is the job creation potential in the water sector. Because unless we do that relatively specifically for each of the major efforts needed in order to build the water solutions, money prioritized might go somewhere else. So if we identify what, for example, if we really focus on reducing non-revenue water through intelligent pressure management solutions, what is the job creation potential there? What wealth can it create? How many? What is the water security we can create? If we map that through sort of a collective effort and then look at what are some of the potentials for private-public partnerships through new innovative ways of working, we can shape a new normal in the water world whilst creating new jobs, is my firm belief.
Fantastic. Alexandros or Rashad, Alexandros, would you like to make a comment?
Thank you very much, Philip. Of course, I agree with everything that was said before by the fellow panelists. For us, it is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for a paradigm shift. And I don't think that the water sector will bring anything more than what it is asked by our leaders right now to do. We are at a critical point where people start thinking whether we go back to business as usual or we do take some bold steps. So I think that discussion that it's mainly, for example, dominate the area of energy or of production, etc., where they think of more green solutions. It's exactly the same thing for the water sector, right? And not only the water sector, but please, let's also focus to the other water using sectors, which are normally the bigger clients like agriculture, etc. So if we start shifting the paradigm and stop this isolation, we have, like all the panelists said up to now, this is not one or the other. This is not on looking in a sustainable way or in a short way. It has to be the same. And I'm sorry to say, but although it's an economic good, it's a human right, water is also an economic good. So we have to always strike a balance. I love a lot of water acts that are out there, especially South Africa was one of the leaders in there, where there is a minimum amount for water for people, and then you start charging tarifications. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandros. Rashad, Shawa, would you like to comment on this opening question of the general?
I share the view of which everybody has expressed, but let me put it this way. The problem in water in the world lies mainly into three facts: mismanagement of water resources, lack of finance, and politics. And coming back to your question, Philip, I mean, which my colleague panelists have pointed out, utilizing actually the water resources management, and mainly if we have a lot of water around the world since God ever created this earth. It's the same quantity of water since the creation of this universe. And it is just a recycling situation. If we take, first of all, I mean, infrastructure has to be really developed and renovated. And on the same time, we look at other things which can enhance and produce a lot of water, which has been depleted and wasted. And which is the water, as we are sitting at this moment, there is billions of gallons running off rivers into the oceans. And I can show you it later on with the panelists and share with them the concessions which we have signed. Even if you take 10, 15% out of that, which has no ecological effect whatsoever on this, It can be utilized for domestic use to enhance the water supply and to ensure the transboundary sort of communication and transportation of water. So it lies all, at the end of the day, whatever we talk to this triangle, which is the mismanagement of water resources and lack of finance, and the third thing, which is the politics. And politics really, in my own opinion, is the main problem that we're facing today. And we have seen so many things. I mean, look what happened today in the current situation. Countries were bargaining over money to enhance the water infrastructure and improvement, and talking about maybe 1 billion or 1.5. Look what is happening at this moment at all levels. Countries are putting billions and trillions of dollars. That mean they have these funds available, and they were not utilizing it. They were using it for politics, actually, and depriving people from what is happening in having safe access to water.
Thank you, Rashad.
This is in a nutshell what it lies about.
Thank you so much, Rashad. In order to feature the knowledge of the panel, what we would like to do now is to talk with 4 of you with a few deeper questions, probing the aspects, and then bring on the next 3. I'd invite Karin, Mads, Rashad, and Beth to remain on the screen, and we'll bring back the other 3 in just a moment. Let's begin to probe more deeply into our discussion now. And I'd like to ask you a question really about a scant resource, which is trust. Many people talk about the difficulties of establishing trust between city leaders, financial institutions, businesses, and local communities. One of the answers that's been given, probably more difficult than it sounds, is to develop public-private partnerships that include the local communities, the civil society, as players. Can you talk a little bit about these difficulties and the kinds of solutions that you would recommend? Anyone who wishes to start?
I'm happy to start.
Okay, Beth, and then Karin, how about that?
So slum dwellers often have a very sort of like conflictual relationship with city managers, coming mostly from insecure tenure and the responses that often cities and governments take towards slum dwellers. So of course you are starting with a very conflictual relationship. But in my opinion, a partnership presupposes you all have to bring something to the table. So you can't be in partnership with someone that's not bringing anything to the table. And as Slum Dwellers International, what we have found is communities can leverage their social connections. They can leverage data collection. They can leverage resources in terms of savings in their communities to create and provide for data-driven development in communities. And this is where we found how we can have the strongest partnerships, where slum dwellers are not seen as a problem that cities need to manage, but rather as a resource that cities can actually use in the provision of water, in the provision of sanitation. I can give you just a quick example. In Harare, the city where I'm originally from in Zimbabwe, for you to get security of tenure, you have to have waterborne sewer. Waterborne sewer is not possible if you don't have water. So the communities that are members of Slum Dwellers International, using innovation, began looking at waterless toilets and started a conversation with local authorities around how you can actually save water by using waterless toilets. And this enabled them to enhance their security of tenure and in that respect, saving water. So they, in my opinion, city managers have an opportunity to use resources that slum dwellers can actually bring to build strong partnerships that are predicated upon each of the different constituencies bringing something onto the table.
Thanks, Beth. That's a great example of the partnership. Karin, what would you say?
Yeah, no, just to add on to Beth, it's true. It's important that each of the stakeholders bring something to the table. The thing I would add is, and this kind of goes to the heart of 2030 Water Resources Group, why we were created. We were catalyzed out of the World Economic Forum when water crises came on the Global Risks Report, and remains unfortunately there. But it was formed out of the realization that for water challenges, it really does require collective solutions. It's not something that one institution or one set of stakeholders alone will solve the problems. So what I would add to Beth is, I think also what helps is having more structured platforms that bring government, private sector, civil society together, because that building trust does take time. It's not an overnight process. And so what we found with our multi-stakeholder platforms that bring government, private sector, civil society is that structured process. It's a very iterative process. There's a high-level steering board, there are work streams, there are task forces, and they're always working together and communicating to really break down those silos that exist. And we have to be honest, every institution has its set of silos. And so by having civil society organizations have an equal seat at that table, it gives them that voice directly to engage with government and private sector in designing collective solutions. So it's not always just about infrastructure solutions, it's also about policy challenges or policy reforms that need to be kind of unblock barriers in terms of better water management. And in this case, as we're talking about urban water resilience. So we're actually looking at how we can bring this model that we've kind of tested and proven of these very structured multi-stakeholder platforms to bring them to the city level. We've done them at the national level. We've done them at watershed levels in 14 countries across the globe, Latin America, Asia, and Africa. And now we're exploring, actually our governing council last fall said, let's start exploring bringing this model to cities. Again, as you brought this point of how to bring stakeholders together, but what we want to make sure is that, ad hoc kind of approaches can bring around solutions, but are they lasting solutions, right? Yeah. And many times, even with different infrastructure like PPPs, there might be policy barriers upstream that really block what could be potential for replicable PPPs. And that's where these very structured approaches, bringing stakeholders together so that they see them all sit together in a collective approach on how to solve these water problems. And if we're really going to move toward 2030 and the SDGs, SDG 17 was put in there because the idea is no one institution can do this alone. And so I would just add in is to find a way where we can build in more structured approaches, bringing stakeholders together where everyone has a seat and a voice at the table. Because I think it's urgent if we're going to really tackle these problems ahead.
Excellent. Mads, in your years as Grundfos CEO, you've prioritized public-private partnerships. Do you have some comments based on your experience?
Yes, we have indeed. And let me give a few perspectives, obviously, primarily from a private sector point of view, because I think in many cases, it's actually quite difficult to engage and frustratingly difficult to really engage the private sector, I believe many would say. So there are in our view, there are three foundations that need to be in place. One of them is to create transparency of the baseline. So what is it we're trying to solve for? What are some of the data we are looking into? And then there needs to be also a clear view on the tariff structure. So does water actually have a price? Can a business case be built? Because if there is not a price, a business case cannot be built. And then finally, any private enterprise, even though it does need to be huge, there needs to be a legal framework. So transparency, water tariffs, and a certain legal framework is a prerequisite for private sectors to dive in. We've had the privilege of being involved in a few very successful examples of blended finance, which is essentially PPPs. And I have to say the local community engagement was absolutely vital. They're the ones who create the anchoring in the society. And they're the ones which we all lean against in order to say, will this work? We have a great example in Vietnam, where we co-created solutions to limit non-revenue water in societies there, with partnering for green growth, so the P4G, and local partners as well, and then Grundfos. And we are moving into next phase, because that might even involve some of the new business models, where we would pay as you save type business models, which is a great way to make it iterative. But the worst thing that can happen is if we all come with our bureaucracy and then nothing will move, even though we spent months and months of it.
Mm-hmm. Rashad, you're a global expert on the finance side of water. One question is there money available? Is there funding available to launch these kinds of private-public partnerships?
Well, as I have stated, Philip, earlier, there's plenty of money around the world, but it's being held for reasons which I have mentioned earlier. The problem of this triangle, which is the PPP, is actually governments, has to facilitate the private sector to enter into this. We know water is the right for everyone around the world, but also if you involve the private sector to do investments, and of course we can see today, I mean, water, and take my word, within 10 years from now, you're gonna see it as, I mean, it's already a commodity being sold over the shelves, in bottles. So you're gonna see a stock exchange, and water will be like coffee, like beans, like corn, like oil, like any other commodity around the world. It will be traded. There will be a price set for water, and we're talking about bulk water, and then we're talking about normal sort of water. So at the end of the day, for finance, it's available, and this is actually, it's allowing the private sector to enter into this, and to governments to give support to innovation and to technologies that comes around. And the minute we take this obstacle out, which is the bureaucracy, I think we're not gonna face any problem in the future in that regard. But coming back to the point, I mean, if you look today at SDG goals, and just let me point out one very important things. I'll give you an example. Japan and
Rashad, can I transition you to a follow-up question that's very relevant today? What does the future of funding for urban water projects look like in the wake of COVID-19? As an expert, how do you see the impact of COVID-19 on this funding question?
Definitely, it will enhance it very much, and the governments will come up with a lot of money now to back up this thing, because as you have seen in the COVID-19, what they are telling you, wash your water, use a lot of water for washing, drink a lot of water, and all the vaccination research requires high quality medical water. So it involves into this. I mean, if you don't have the right and proper infrastructure, and it puts it into the surface, that, and coming back to my question, which is, so look at Germany and Japan. These two countries were destroyed in World War II. 20 years later, they became the second, third economic powers in the world, and they don't have a drop of oil, but they have water. If we look at Africa today, why it is behind? Because 40% of their GDP is being spent to treating on these young children who are born with water contaminated disease. And of course, they are the backbone for your development. So the finance is available. The money is there. It just needs to be well organized. And this is something that when we created, now it's being under corporation, and the end of the year, it will be finally up and running, the International Water Bank, which demonstrates this sort of an example, joining the governments, institutions, the private sector, being the reference address for such finance and blending finance and supporting initiatives.
That is very encouraging news. The World Water Bank ready to come online by the end of the year. Mads, you wanted to respond to the question of impact of COVID-19. I know that Grundfos is deeply involved in responses to the crisis.
Absolutely, we are, but I fully agree with Rashad, and I actually think we are at a moment of time where all the actors in the global water sector, we need to step up our game, because two really positive things happens in the wake of the tragedy that COVID-19 obviously is to the world. One is that governments are or will wake up to the fact that what we need to do to restart the economies are totally different sums of money that we have so far thought to invest both in climate change, combating climate change, and securing water solutions. So SDG 6 and 13. So there is a totally different scale of magnitude. And the second thing is that apart from drinking water and waterborne diseases, Now, on top of that comes the hygiene coming from water to fight also pandemics like this one, which has brought an increasing public attention to the importance of water. And if we then seize the moment both to push those two agenda items politically, but at the same time, if we come up together to say, here are some partnership approaches to, for example, performance-based business models, where private sector defined on or based on, for example, shared savings in the system, can then create new, innovative, intelligent business models while not taking away the public control of the water utilities, which understandably many societies are concerned about. If we seize that opportunity, we can leapfrog a situation that we've been struggling with for decades.
Thank you. Beth and Karin, what does the COVID-19 situation look like on the ground? Our colleagues are optimistic that it can lead to further funding. In the short term, it looks pretty serious. Beth, can you comment?
I'm an optimist too. I think what COVID-19 has shown us is the interconnectedness of our sort of like a humanity. So when slum dwellers don't have water, a city suffers, and those the haves and the have-nots all suffer in the same space. My hope is that we see these public goods as essential for our cities, and we devise a way to provide water and sanitation at the level that is required to ensure the health of each and every city. And someone mentioned earlier about Cape Town. I know even most cities will have a threshold that is the barest minimum that is required for your household to survive. I certainly feel that cities, governments, development partners have resources that would enable. What has been lacking is the political will to address that, and the agency that COVID-19 has brought to bear on all of us is the realization that this is something that we have to expedite, and it is possible. Where are these resources now coming from, when for the longest time some of these initiatives have been taken a back burner? So I am also an optimist that, and I'm hoping, I'm an optimist, I'm a realist as well. I know the battle will be tough, but I certainly feel there will be more agency around addressing the water needs of the most vulnerable in our society.
Karin, can I transition with you to what many of us feel is the most frightening part of supplying water to the world's population, and that are the climate change models and the predictions about the future of global climate disruption. It's a question a lot of us are afraid even to ask, because what the models suggest over the coming decades. I'm sure you've thought of it in your position, in your international work. What thoughts would you bring? It's kind of hard to be an optimist sometimes when one reads the climate models. What would you say?
Well, I'm like Beth. I'm an optimist. I know it can be quite discouraging, and we've already seen, the impacts from increased variability, droughts and floods, more often. It's one of the things that we've been looking at in the World Bank Group in terms of, we're working on COVID response, but what do we do in countries that are undergoing serious floods or droughts at the same time, right? So it is a very serious issue. I do see, though, more innovation, I would say. I mean, the water sector, we can probably all agree, has been a bit of a lag when it comes to innovation compared to many other sectors. There are innovations, but I think the challenge has always been, how do we scale these innovations? And so as these urgency of these issues, everyone is feeling them, considering them, and feeling how do we come together as partners, I do think there are new ways of thinking. So we, for example, the 2030 Water Resources Group, we've joined together with the World Business Council on Sustainable Development and the World Economic Forum and a number of private sector companies, so Procter & Gamble, Suez, Kohler, Arcadis, and a number on a new coalition called the 50 Liter Home Coalition. And the idea is to reinvent urban water management. And it stemmed from the Day Zero crisis in Cape Town, of course, as cities, more and more cities are looming with this Day Zero situation. But I think it's also as this coalition is building, it's not just the funding aspect of how do we tackle these challenges, including climate change that's facing us with all these different scenarios, but also how do we bring partners together in a different kind of paradigm shift and how we look and value water. Certainly, I think Henk will be someone who speaks on this issue of value of water, who's been working hard on this. And the idea is creating collective innovations that reduce water use, drive for better urban water management. So through the 50 Liter Home Coalition, we're going to be piloting in a number of cities over the next several years. And the idea is really driving collective action innovations and scaling them. Promoting wastewater and treatment reuse is part of that. I think for me, having been in the space for quite a long time, I see the future as more and more wastewater treatment and reuse potential, moving from a linear thinking around water to a more circular economy approach thinking of water. And I don't think we've really, if I pardon the pun, I don't think we've tapped all the potential that's out there in terms of these types of approaches. So I think more coalitions, real partnerships where everybody pulls up their sleeves together and try to drive innovation, because I'm going to be an optimist with Beth and others. I do think there's a lot there for us in the water sector as we work more collectively.
Thanks, Karin. Mads, one of the things that business does very well is to predict the future, because that's how one runs a business well. When you look at the climate models and what they say about the growing, escalating water crisis, how do you stay positive or optimistic, as Beth and Karin have put it? And what really are, in terms of the hard numbers, the prospects for us ahead?
Yeah, I think in many ways, the difference between a COVID-19 crisis and the climate crisis, and therefore the related water challenges that the world inevitably are going to face, is that the climate and water challenges are predictable. And that just removes any excuse of us not to proactively react to that. And therefore, again, maybe I'm just too optimistic today, but I actually think that the COVID-19 and the fact that the world and all of us have been caught brutally by surprise will just be an eye-opener for all of us to say that the next huge crisis can actually be predicted. It can even be modeled. We had the privilege to also be a sponsor of the C40 Global Mayors Summit in Copenhagen in November. And 90% of the mayors I talked to, of course, they were doing everything they could to combat or to lower emissions, but their mind was going towards how can we mitigate the water-related implications of climate change. And that means that, as just an example, as Israel, the country Israel, decades ago, they declared nationally that water was a strategic issue. That has led to that despite having the toughest, harshest conditions for water, they have innovative water solutions. I believe now is the time actually where we, private sector and public sector together, where we can actually ensure that we treat water truly strategic, both the wastewater, the flooding and the drinking water, and ensure that we put up, like the EU has just done, new water loss directive to ensure that we legislate, we put up demands, we put opportunities for companies to come with innovative solutions. So again, I believe that the predictions, inevitable predictions, will give a wonderful opportunity to leapfrog, even though short-term it might be expensive.
That's fantastic. Rashad, did you want to comment? I think I saw your hand a moment ago on this question of global climate change.
Exactly. Well, do you see what's happening around the world at this moment? How clean is the environment? And we're talking about climate change. Everything is flourishing. And this is coming back. People were underestimating the, things about the climate change. And in this era, and what is we're really facing at the moment is a collective thing, because it can hit every one of us. And, from that aspect, we have to really put collective efforts. And what Matt mentioned about strategic planning and cooperating, I am into favoring this thing to happen and take place, because actually we cannot just look from one angle. Every country has to look for itself and others around it, to cooperate. Some rich countries, you have abundant amount of water, and why they should be depriving the neighboring country from having access to this water. If you cooperate, At the beginning, I mean, at the end of the day, it is going to be very useful for the sustainable development goals and improving the climate change and taking all the precautions and having a safe access to water. Beside that, on the investment side, I mean, we come back to it as the finance is really with the politics, with the mismanagement of water resources, is the crucial fundamental thing that if we solve this and we allow it and we support it, then we shouldn't have any problem. Everybody will have safe access to water.
Thank you.
Organizations and World Bank and similar organization around the world has to collectively work on putting the hands together, as Karin has mentioned.
Thanks very much. Before I bring back on Alexandros, Betsy, and Henk, Beth, would you take us from this global question of climate change to a highly specific question, a question often raised: how can cities reduce water loss, increase revenue water, without cutting off people's only access to water, especially in the informal settlements? Informal tapping and so forth is how people get basic water supplies. How can cities reduce water loss and yet not cut off people's only access to water?
I don't have figures, but my sense is that cities lose more water in infrastructure that's not working properly, through leaks, than they do through illegal tapping. And as I mentioned earlier, to a large extent, the slum dwellers use very little water and they pay a lot more for it. So if there were creative ways to actually make access better for slum dwellers or the most vulnerable in our cities, you could still find that a city would manage with the water resources that they have. The problem, I think, is around the distribution and how slum dwellers are completely left out of this process. I wanted to talk just quickly about how this relates to climate change. As a matter of fact, slum dwellers have to mitigate and climate change. They have no solution. They have no option but to do this. But currently, as we are building the infrastructure around climate finance, they have been completely excluded from this. So there is a huge task that is required to actually sort of like rejig the architecture of climate finance to ensure that communities that already are living to the nearest of the zero carbon economy as much as possible already have solutions on how we address climate change moving forward. So rather than have cities in the global south recreate the problems of the global north around emissions, we have a huge opportunity to actually jump that trajectory. And I see this in terms of how cities begin to have access to water, smart ways around energy, smart ways around sanitation, and there are already models that are being developed elsewhere. Rather than for cities in the global south to have this urban development trajectory that recreates your Londons or your Shanghais, we have a huge opportunity to actually sort of like jump that stage and find creative ways to ensure we have zero carbon emissions, because as it is, the world's urban poor are bearing the brunt of climate change, but they are the least polluters in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Let me invite Betsy, Henk, and Alexandros back on, and we'll give these four panelists a chance to catch their breath before we all join each other in about 20 minutes. Welcome back again to Henk, Betsy, and Alexandros. What we would like to do, begin with a question about economic stimulus funding. Many people believe that economic stimulus funding can bring investment into water structure. In your opinion, what kind of infrastructure investments should be prioritized? Anyone who wishes to begin?
Well, I can jump in.
Thanks, Betsy.
And I apologize for the noise of the grass cutting outside my window.
It's actually not coming through the mic, so you're fine.
Wonderful. It's pretty loud to me. I mean, I think that the first thing to think about, or that I'd be interested in talking about, is sort of setting principles for what kind of infrastructure we want. I think we've all well established the fact that there's tremendous need. I think we, and a number of the previous panelists have talked about this, I think we should really be thinking about not the same infrastructure that we would have built in the 20th century. More decentralized closed loop systems where we're capturing the energy value from wastewater, for example, the nutrient value. There are real businesses to be developed, even at a small scale, off-grid, fecal sludge management sort of level with those kinds of systems. There's more energy in wastewater than is required to actually treat it. We're just not capturing that right. Much less the water that could be recycled and reused. And that's extremely important in many, especially arid areas or where water scarcity is a big challenge. I think we also need to be, so, thinking about it, decentralized closed loop, low carbon approaches too. I mean, why would we build, we shouldn't be building new coal-fired power plants. We need to think about the equivalent of sort of, distributed energy systems, but think about them for water at the local community level that really meet those needs. And then the other thing I think is really important is to think about the natural infrastructure systems, both within cities, in nearby watersheds, and even far away. Rio and Sao Paulo are very much affected in terms of their hydrologic cycle by what's happening in the Amazon. So how can we start to make some smart investments at all three of those scales? And WRI is doing some work on that with cities right now to think about that as part of the infrastructure shed, if you will. That may sound really theoretical. In fact, it's very practical too. So we need to be thinking much differently today than in the past.
Alexandros, I saw you nod your head when Betsy was speaking.
Yes, thank you very much, Philip. I'm totally with Betsy. This is a good opportunity to build back better, right? To use the approach that we use in resilience in general, build back better, and to bring in new ideas. We have to start thinking, as Betsy said, more on nature-based solutions. But for me also, it's a combination. One of the problems that we have with nature-based solutions is that they're still not engineered, let's say. So we have to start looking at this approach, a combination of both gray infrastructure and green infrastructure. And I also agree with Betsy on the issue of decentralized systems. Systems that are centralized are usually rigid, and especially if one thinks about global change, which has not only the urbanization and population growth, but also the climate change effects as factors, right? So then you realize that a centralized system, other than the big energy and the limitation in expansion, does not offer the solution that you want, a flexible solution. You have to start thinking about decentralized systems that are modular in their design. So
just a sec, Henk, could you mute for just a second, and I'll call you just a second so we won't get background noise. Thanks. Alexandros.
Yes, no, basically, just to wrap it up, I was also adding that it should be decentralized systems because they give you a huge flexibility, not only to build them modularly. So when you have this urban sprawl, when you have situation of peri-urban areas, a modular design can be located and smaller decentralized system to even service the ones that they are most vulnerable and usually very poorly serviced. Right? And as I said before, then you can start thinking, when it is a decentralized system, the combination of different technologies. You can pick up the water from the rain and then can start giving it for different uses at the local level, reducing your energy requirements. So that's where, we have to start rethinking the process. The engineering that we're using right now was built in the 70s. When I was in school in the 90s, this is what we were learning about. It's been 30 years. It's been 30 years. Technology has leapfrogged, but we have not done the same in water. So we need to follow up.
Henk, you worked on stimulus funding with President Obama after Hurricane Sandy and in multiple places around the world. What comments would you bring?
Yeah, not only post hurricanes, but also in more conflict related places as well as droughts. And this, I really thank you, Betsy and Alexandros, because this is like the opposite of the the first part of this discussion with the other panelists, because I actually have a big challenge with a lot of what was said there, because it's not easy. Yeah, if it was easy, then not 2.3 billion would have no access to safe drinking water, and over 4 billion would not have access to safe sanitation facilities if it was easy. It's not. But there are huge opportunities if we think twice or thrice. An integrated, more inclusive, based in the future approach is possible on the short term. But it means we have to collaborate better. We have to invest in that thinking and collaboration, and invest in the research, and invest in how investing in one part actually adds value in other parts. And that might not be a financial return. And this is where we have to rethink how our economies work. So it's not only are we going to invest in the infrastructure of the past? No, we can't. We have to invest in the infrastructure of the future. More green, more blue, more gray, more socially oriented, more about inclusion and empowerment. But we also should not invest in the economies of the past by using those economic models of the past. We find ourselves now really at a critical moment in time, is where 5 years ago we agreed on Sustainable Development Goals, 17, that we all like to silo up because everyone finds a vested interest in one. But it's not about one SDG for you, it's about 17 for all. And that value-based proposition was not developed yet. COVID-19 really puts an emphasis is that what we did in the past actually makes us more vulnerable every day. What we can do in the future can really build this new economy and build new society. But that will not be easy. So I think water can be a mechanism for that. Because if you invest in water, you add values across social, cultural, environmental, and economic interest and needs and opportunities. Not the only way, it's not the only enabler, but it is about people, it is about environment, it is about health and good place. So we as a water people and as a water world can really offer opportunities for the rest of the world on how this new economy will look like. But it's not going to be easy. It's amazing, but it's not going to be easy.
Henk, while you have the floor, can I ask you a question, the next question that we wanted to explore with this panel? Are there any ways, in your view, that we can reframe our relationship with water in some more fundamental way, so that when we save water in one area, we don't immediately find much greater water use in another? Sometimes it seems like a zero-sum game. A lot of money and time and effort, we get a water savings, and it says instantaneously in another part of the country or city, it seems to be consumed, another branch. What about that dynamic? Can we beat it?
Yeah, I think then again, that is a cultural part. Are we, because that is also where a lot of the places around the world where desalination is again positioned as the holy grail. When it comes to the SDGs and climate change, there are no holy grails. Forget it. It's not single focused infrastructure is stupid infrastructure. If we continue to invest in those single focused infrastructure investment and see only the short-term financial gains and take them and run, we will end up in the same crisis as we are now within a short period of time. But if we reconsider our relationship to the environment, and water again is a great not only metaphor but mechanism for that, we start to understand better. If we take care of the water takes care of us. So if we capture it, clean it, and bring it back into the aquifer, we can use the aquifer also for our water consumption and production. But if we just leave it flow, pollute in our streets, and then flow to the ocean, and then we take polluted water out of the ocean, bring it into these energy consuming desalination plants that cost trillions and that just pump more volume into the system, more volume does not solve the water crisis. A circular approach that is environment and human oriented, smaller scale, often locally based, really about an enabling environment where people take charge and are enabled to think about these natural and man-made resources. I think this is what the future has for us, which is amazing. But it means we have to shy away from how we did it in the past, and have
yeah.
the guts to rethink that future and come up with those solutions that are inspirational, that we can scale up and replicate across the world. It is amazing, but we have to give ourselves the opportunity.
Beautifully put. Betsy, I saw you nodding your head, so I wanted to call on you.
Yeah, I agree with most of what Henk is saying. Almost always, I agree with Henk. But I think what's also really needed is a more honest assessment of our sort of household budget, if you will, at a city level or at a watershed level. And what we see in the Aqueduct Global Water Risk Mapping tool that was mentioned that WRI developed, which is now in broad use in the private sector, which, as a quick aside, is very interesting. Companies that are really paying attention to water-related risks and engaging in corporate stewardship and stepping even outside their own four walls into the watershed are finding that they are feeling more resilient to the sorts of shocks and stresses, both the sort of political and reputational ones, as well as the physical risks. So not dissimilar to what's been happening in climate, companies that are really paying attention to those issues are finding that they are getting better returns. I just want to note that. The same can be true for cities, but we have to operate within the bounds of a budget. There are plenty of examples in the developing world, developed world, I should say, some of which have been cited, of the expectation that there will be growth, economic and population growth, but that the same amount of water essentially needs to be used to continue to fuel that growth. We know the kinds of strategies that can be invested in that allow us to do that. It's tougher in the developing world, but it's certainly not impossible. It includes some of the strategies that Alexandros was talking about, of rainwater capture, for example, something that we too often treat as almost a waste product or the thing that causes urban drainage and flooding problems. If we capture that as a water source and use it for toilet flushing and HVAC systems and so on, that's really, really powerful. But we have to first set the expectation that there needs to be a sort of sustainable level of water use. And the last thing I'll say is that in our aqueduct analysis, when we look at future projections, yes, climate change is going to have a big impact, without question. It's certainly going to lead to more erratic, more unpredictable water conditions in the same cities, too much water, too little water, even within the same year. We know that to be true. But when we do the analysis, what we really see having the impact on water stress is water demand. So we have to manage the demand, and we can do that if we think more holistically. And sometimes that might even include, for example, having cities make investments in nearby agricultural lands where 70% of the water demand is coming from, to improve efficiency of that agricultural production so that more water is available downstream. With power plants, the same kind of thing. We need to think in a more holistic way about all of that.
Alexandros, do you want to speak briefly to this question of demand control from your work at UNESCO?
I just want to follow up with what Betsy was saying, because she just brought an example of cities actually trying to also deal with their demand for agriculture, let's say. And within the same holistic approach, you see also cities like, for example, New York, where it's investing kilometers and kilometers away on the conservation of the environment in order to make sure that actually they have savings downstream from treating the water. So the issue is always, it has to be thought of in a holistic manner. And unfortunately, just like Henk was saying before, we tend to compartmentalize everything and put silos because it's easier for us afterwards. And that's where, to me, the whole problem is. Water, unfortunately, is fragmented, period, and its governance is fragmented because of that. And unless we start doing something about that, no matter what we do, we can only reach a certain level. We can bring in technical solutions, but unless you also have the environment for implementing these technical solutions, go to the next levels of policy, etc., it will not work.
Let's do one last question with you as a sub-panel, and then we'll bring everybody back for the difficult task of summarizing this entire discussion in just a minute or so per person. And this is the question of the public-private partnerships. These PPPs are viewed as critical and yet at the same time as highly complicated. I'd be interested in knowing what the three of you think are some of the key elements in the successful partnerships of this sort in the water industry. whoever'd like to be, well, actually, Alexandros, you're unmuted. So why don't I begin with you since it's, but each of you in your work are major experts in these PPPs, broadly believed to be crucial concretely if we're going to succeed. What are the key elements of success, Alexandros?
I think this is a very important question, and I think that PPPs will come up stronger even more now. As one of our panelists said during the very beginning of our discussion, we're gonna go back now into a mode of trying to plug in holes that we have in the economy. So we have a big risk of actually water being, forgotten about. PPPs will come in even more stronger. They have a good opportunity to do a great job globally, right? I mean, we have an opportunity to leverage industrial experience plus funds, right? But at the same time, what we have to do is we have to make sure also that there is transparency in the whole process, that there are the tools to implement the PPPs. If you don't have the right policies, you cannot start the right PPPs. If you don't have the right institutional setup, you cannot follow through. So we have to have first the basics in order to ensure that the PPPs will be successful. And then for me, at least personally, I believe that transparency has to rule the process. And the more we introduce different mechanisms, like we can have the mechanism of a regulator, etc., where it can make at least things more transparent and make sure that everybody wins, that the company will have some profit, that the policies will be followed, but at the end of the day, we will take care of the citizens and their rights to water. So for us, there is a huge opportunity for PPPs to come in and to make a huge difference now. That we expect that unfortunately the funding will not run towards water, unfortunately.
Thanks. Briefly, Betsy and Henk, we'd love to hear the specific takeaways you would want to offer for successful PPPs.
Yeah, I'm gonna change the question a little bit, Philip, if you'll allow me. I like a lot of what's been said, and I am not, nor is WRI in this area, expert on PPPs, but I know it's a growing area of interest. I guess I want to come back to the decentralized question. I know there are models that have been applied for PPPs that are more about really local access to water and sanitation. There's one in Dakar that I know that water and sanitation for the urban poor has worked on, for example, to bring in more effective fecal sludge management approaches to actually empty latrines and not having people doing that who are not well protected. It's very, very dirty, filthy work. Building local SMEs and jobs, but providing the resources and means to do that. So I just want to underscore that decentralized point, and I want us to be thinking about PPPs not only to build major water and wastewater treatment plants, but to think about what the models are that we can scale that are effective at the really local level and for informal settlements and for the poor that don't have access to water and sanitation.
Fantastic. Henk, a last thought on this one?
Yeah, I think the PPP, as Betsy said, is not so much about the project, but it's about the process and the people. In the Netherlands, we had water governance for 900 years. Our water democracy started not because we had a dictator, but because we wanted to share our water's challenges, both quality, the amount, as well as safety. We brought all stakeholders together. So the farmer, the mayor, the investor, the entrepreneur, the community leader, and we still have that. So organizing around water-related challenges makes that you bring all different partners, informal and formal, institutional and individual, professional and non-professional, at the table. That's the start of a good project. And if you keep them at the table from the very beginning, where you still don't know what to do, all the way until the end, you build up capacity and enabling environment, but also revenue models and business cases. Because you can identify needs, you can identify opportunities and revenues. So then it's possible. But if you say, I want big infrastructure and I need private sector investment, to just drive that through. That's a different approach. Yeah? That's a different approach. And water being, taking the perspective of having a low, small, on the ground, small scale community-based approach. There's also bigger infrastructure. If we look at nature-based solutions, they can also even be big on our coast, in our cities. When we look at climate change, too much and too little, and the pollution of water, there are revenue streams too. But then again, we go back to the earlier discussion on the reduction of use, the reuse of the water, and the recycling of it. And I think then if we do that right, and we combine not only wastewater, but also solid waste, there are opportunities indeed, also for public and private sector investment. But the real model starts with the process, and that means with investing in the people.
Fantastic. Thank you for this discussion. I'd like to invite the other 4 panelists back onto the screen now for the closing of our panel together. It has been a part of the work of EcoCiv always to end with the question of hope. And that's the question that I want to ask each of you. I'll just call in your names so that we'll be able to move through everybody. Here's the closing question I'd like to ask. As we step back and think back over this panel and think back over the topic of water security and the realistic situation we've faced in a world which is currently shut down largely over the COVID-19 crisis. All of you are water experts. Between you, we calculated 243 years of water experience. So that's several lifetimes worth represented on this call. We want to ask about hope, and we want to ask about opportunity. One way of asking is, in your experience, if you could just pull out the 2 or 3 best practices that you'd name for moving from crisis to collaboration. But actually the question is even more simple. How can we collaborate on water before we as humanity and the planet on which we live reach a point of crisis? Rashad, may I ask to call on you first and say what would be your closing statement for this panel?
Thank you, Philip. I really valued what my colleague panelists have mentioned. And of course, there was 2 important things that Karin and Henk, pointed out about it. We are now in a situation where we have to look at the future in a collective manner, meaning governments have to lend hand, have to facilitate, and allow the private sector to play its role into the improvement of water sector. We as normal people, we are the end users. We have nothing to say. It all lies in the hand of the politicians and of the financial institutions and similar institutions such as the European Development Bank, African Development Bank, World Bank, and so on, and United Nations. And we have to come now and sit together, not for the sake of sitting, but rather to have hands on the problem. Lending finance, allowing it to flow into the sector to improve it, because this is what is happening in the world. We should not bear any obstacles. Transboundary agreements between countries, countries itself to allow the investments into its own sector. If we take today a country like Ethiopia, for example, or Australia, you have in the northeast of it abundant amount of water, but on the west side of it, they are still carrying gallons. The infrastructure, the networking, the transportation, desalination, as Henk said, it's not a sustainable way of getting it. It's harming the environment. It's putting a lot of salinity into it. It's a big hazard. If I talk today about my country, Kuwait, and similar GCC country in the Gulf, they depend on only one, source. And this is very, very dangerous to do so. The hands of people lies into this industrial or artificial element. If it stops tomorrow, we will have no access to water. countries has to put down. I mean, we have rich countries in water, such as, for example, Canada has to play its roles, or other similar countries who have an abundant amount of water. It just needs all into the new nexus to actually have a solid cooperation to allow this PPP situation to take place. And in order now, we have to improve the water infrastructure, and we have to really start utilizing all what we can in a very effective manner that will bring everything together. And I call for banks and financial institutions now to start focusing, because at the end of the day, and before I ended up, why the International Water Bank we came in between the financial institutions who look at the dollar sign always, or institutions who will do it for development purposes with a very marginal sort of return, like the World Bank, for example, making 1 and 2. We came in the middle to bring everybody together, to work with everyone of these institutions and the private sector. And also, we know for a fact, people doesn't do something for free, unfortunately. But so you can give them a sort of a reward or bonus on what they are doing. So these elements have to start. We have all to be in the same boat. We have all to put our hands together, and we can sit here forever talking.
Thanks.
The point is, you know, roll your sleeves and get into the business.
Good
and
for you.
Let's do it.
Let's roll up our sleeves and get it done. Thank you, Rashad. May I call on Karin Krchnak?
Sure. Yes. No. I mean, you know, following on Rashad, I agree. I think, you know, I had the honor of being in New York when the Sustainable Development Goals were being adopted, and to be honest, it was the very first time that I heard governments refer to the role of the private sector and the importance of bringing in the private sector. Now, I think they could have also added in civil society in those comments, because there's so much that each of the stakeholder sets bring to these problems. So I think, you know, for me, I would say summing up is really, let's focus on breaking down the silos. You know, we see where the silos have gotten us over the last number of decades. We certainly have seen how very structured multi-stakeholder platforms and models can create a safe space for building that trust across stakeholders. And through that trust, I think there's that ability to kind of accelerate innovations, come in with alternative blended finance models, as we've just, you know, was previously discussed on PPPs and other blended finance approaches, but also build more adaptive strategies around promoting circular economy approaches, transforming value chains, and building resilience. And I would note on the end is really that resilience around institutions as well. I mean, as we all, I think everybody's mentioned or touched upon governance as being a key thorn when it comes to water management. And I think that's where particularly this building collective trusted solutions that can last the long term is really important. And we have those models. We can show that they can bring results and outcomes. And so I think as cities look in terms of how to tackle these issues going forward, you know, would be, I think, the strong encouragement of break down those silos and really bring together the stakeholders sets together in a really functional collective way.
Thank you. Thanks. Alexandros Makargakis.
Thank you very much. For me, I just want to stress a couple of things, because we have to be also aware of the reality on the ground when we're talking about how can we collaborate on water. There are 6 agreements globally for the 600 transboundary aquifers we have. All right, for rivers, because we see them, it's easy. We always have bilateral cooperation, multilateral, etc. For groundwater, we have none. So let's also be aware that there's a lot of work to be done. We work on the science policy interface, right? We want to make sure that decision makers have scientific facts to move ahead with their decisions. So for us, we have to increase that. We have to give the right information, the right tools to the decision makers. That's one way of promoting the collaboration. And the second, because also this way you're going to start dropping, you know, any type of boundaries. And the second one, again, we are UNESCO, so we are the educational also United Nations organization. we should not forget, the raising awareness and the training components, right? We have people that unfortunately they're not trained enough to even understand what they need. And in a lot of cases, they fell victims of people who have their own interests, which is normal in some way, unfortunately. So we need to make sure that, first of all, people understand what we're talking about, what they have to manage. They have a common understanding also. It's not that they understand by themselves and the other one has a different perception, but we all agree in that type of issues. And this should go throughout all levels, from the people on the ground. The communities have to be aware so they know their rights and what they should demand from the politicians. The decision makers should know what they're doing. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandros. Dr. Beth Chitekwe-Biti.
Thank you. For me, I think just to emphasize two particular points, that the solutions come with a collectivization, finding different people to come together. And I quite liked the issue around the PPPs, but oftentimes public-private partnerships are defined in terms of large corporations. I think we also have to look at this in the context of informal settlements, where there are businesses that flourish in those contexts, and where, when cities look at private partnerships, should also look at that level. Then, of course, as Slum Dwellers International, what has worked in our relationship with cities is where we different stakeholders come onto the table and find a way to address even the most difficult situations. And I just wanted to emphasize that everyone in a partnership, everyone brings something to the table. What we have found in the affiliates that are part of Slum Dwellers International in 33 countries in the Global South is data collected by communities is very critical in informing plans that city managers can bring to the table. But also resources of the poor themselves are critical, because like we have emphasized in a lot of cases, the most vulnerable in our communities pay a poverty penalty for accessing water, for accessing sanitation. So it is a misnomer to claim that there are no resources in poor neighborhoods. There are resources in poor neighborhoods, because they are ultimately paying for water at a premium. So I think it's being clever around how to reorganize that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beth. Henk, Ovink.
Thanks so much, Philip, and thanks so much, W12, to organize this whole panel, and all panelists for joining. I think this is already a collective call to deal more sustainably with water and get water higher on the agenda. For that, I only want to raise the 3 points we, with the high-level panel on water, agreed upon. Is one, we have to increase our understanding of this complex issue of water. We always like to simplify it and put it into our very comfortable silos, and it doesn't work. So understanding increases awareness, and facing the complexity helps bring more sustainable, more resilient, more equitable and inclusive solutions. Second, based on that understanding, we can be able to value water different. So it's not about the price, it's really about the values. Investing in water is investing in better health, in equity, equality, sustainable economies, sustainable cities, a good environment and biodiversity, and so forth. So invest in water, you invest in all the SDGs. And last, then it is about the organization, the management, the partnership, and the inclusion. If we really do this, leaving no one behind, everybody on the table from the beginning to the end, that is the way our sustainable development goals will become a reality. And this COVID-19 crisis proves that if we don't, we fail. And if we do, there's a real good opportunity for a better future.
Thank you. Beautifully put. Betsy, Otto.
Yeah, I just also want to say thank you so much, Philip and W12 and everyone, and really enjoyed this conversation. It's been a pleasure to be part of it. I want to just end with a couple of reflections. One, tens of trillions of dollars are being pushed out the door around the world to respond to COVID and for recovery, economic recovery. Let's make sure that that goes to water, that the $1 spent on water provides $6 to $7 of benefits. Let's make sure more of it comes to water, but let's make sure that we invest in the right stuff, as we've talked about, the solutions that are really going to get at the base of the pyramid problems that most poor people in the world are experiencing, and that everyone can benefit from clean water. And I guess you asked about hope. I see some really interesting things happening around nature-based solutions and green infrastructure investment, in the kind of bringing gray plus green strategies together. It's not either or, it's both. We've been doing some work with the World Bank, with IDB and others around this, and we're really starting to see this shift, increasing green bonds and so on. What's needed actually often are aggregation mechanisms to bring these smaller decentralized projects together into something that is fundable, and also the early stage project preparatory facility kinds of funding that's needed to bring these early ideas into a form that actually can be funded by financiers. The last thing I would say is I want to make a plea and build on what Beth and Henk and others have said. We need to focus on doing this in a way that really brings jobs and economic opportunity for small businesses in poor communities. There's really the potential to do that already there. There are models that we can scale, and that's going to be a very important part of recovering from COVID. So thanks.
And finally, Mads Nipper, will you take us out, please?
I will indeed. Yes, also from my side, thank you very much for organizing this. Really, really inspirational. Now, what is the best thing I can say to install hope? I fully agree with Henk that this is not easy, because saying it would be easy would be lying. But I would claim still that we have a unique opportunity at this time to push something that has been exceptionally difficult to push at the speed it needs to. I think the COVID crisis does present that opportunity, both to ensure that politically and financially this water gets the priority it needs to. And then I'll end with something that may sound like a commercial break from our own company. It's not meant to be, but I'm a firm believer that the social contract between business and society is undergoing fundamental change. I'm privileged to work for a family and foundation-owned company where our climate and water ambition is the core of our strategy. So being a contributor to bringing clean drinking water to 300 million people who don't have access to safely managed drinking water today, and to become a climate positive company by 2030, that is the primary purpose of our strategy. And I believe that many companies will follow that path, and that will redefine the opportunity to engage private sector companies. And just to end by saying that we are not just talking about this. We are investing in creating local water entrepreneurs through a franchise system and blockchain technology in Ghana. We are investing in becoming a driving force in replacing the 10 million diesel-driven submersible pumps in India for small-scale farmers to solar-driven solutions. We do have partnerships with several NGOs to bring safely managed drinking water to sub-Saharan communities by the millions, which we are already doing. We do engage in blended finance models in Southeast Asia. So, and I had a conversation with the CEO of our largest, fiercest competitor, and we talked about how can we bring the entire water sector together as a sector rather than only compete against each other to bring systemic change from the end of private sector. And if we manage to do that, and if companies will choose the path that we have chosen, we will see a formidable force who will be able to work with local communities and authorities to drive a change we've not seen before.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mads. Ladies and gentlemen who've joined us from around the world, please join me now in applauding for our 7 panelists. I hope you could hear the thunderous applause from 5 continents around. The panelists today have addressed for us some of the most urgent questions with regard to human existence on this planet. Air, water, food, these are the things that are required for human existence, Food requires access to water. For us to solve the water problem is for us to guarantee a quality of life for human beings around the planet, as well as thriving ecosystems. Again, I want to remind you that the framework is available now online. It can be, the PDF can be downloaded at these addresses that you can see in front of you. And I would encourage you to follow these W12 websites and ecociv.org for further developments. Please follow the work of our 7 specialists today as they continue to work in the directions that we have discussed. Today, we have covered everything from highly specific needs and injustices, financing models, the availability of financing, all the way through to the biggest questions that human beings face as we seek to live on this planet. Thank you for all that you do. Be well, stay safe, and goodbye.